History buffs of Reddit, what is one of the most fascinating stories you've learned that no one seems to talk about and can't be found in textbooks? The Lake Pickner disaster. Until 1980, Lake Pickner was a smallish freshwater lake with a maximum depth of about 10-15 feet, located in southern Louisiana. Locals mostly used it for trout fishing, and it also had a canal running 10 miles from the lake southward to the Gulf of Mexico. The main industry of the area was a massive salt mine that stood below the ground, partially underneath the lake itself. Thing is, huge natural salt deposits like this often coincide with oil reserves, so it wasn't out of the ordinary when oil companies came searching. In November of 1980, Texaco had set up a rig in the lake and was doing some exploratory drilling, hoping to make bank. Little did they know that one of their triangulation coordinates was slightly off, and so they had incorrectly guessed the location of the salt mine below their feet. Their drill bit punched into the roof of the salt deposit about 400 feet earlier than expected, and water began to drain slowly into the salt. And what happens when salt meets water? It dissolves. As the water dissolved more and more salt, it made more and more room for water to be sucked down, which in turn dissolved more salt and made more room, setting off a massive chain reaction. The oil rig on the surface keeled to the side and collapsed, its workers barely escaping before the water pressure became too much to swim through. The remnants of the rig were sucked into the bottom of the lake in what had turned from a tiny hole to a whirlpool, the force of the water shearing away soil and making a bigger hole as it went. The salt mine at the time was fully staffed with workers 1,500 feet below the ground, who were going about their daily shifts in the mine without any knowledge of the events taking place above them, until they saw water dripping through the roof of the tunnels. Thanks to well-rehearsed evacuation plans, none of them died before the mine was flooded, but water is just about the worst thing you can see in a salt mine. The whirlpool on the surface, having eaten the rig, began to suck down the entire contents of the lake itself, including 11 barges, various small boats, and yes, the poor trout. The whirlpool grew into a maelstrom, its pressure increasing and in turn building more pressure by creating a bigger and bigger hole, eroding more and more of the salt mine. As it pulled down the entire lake, the water began to shear away at the shores, creating landslides and tearing trees out by the roots. Many of Jefferson Island's 100-year-old pecan trees were lost to the maelstrom, along with several local homes that sat on the shore of the lake and were ripped out by the foundation. The local botanical gardens was destroyed entirely as the soil underneath it was eroded in the span of only a few hours. Compressed air inside the mine finally exploded out through the mine shafts, quickly followed by a 400-foot geyser erupting from the mine's entrance. Not only did Lake Pickner drain entirely into the mine, dragging 64 acres of destroyed land with it, but the pressure was so great that it also reversed the direction of the Del Cambra Canal. The ocean water from the Gulf of Mexico rushed northward through the canal to fill the Pickner Basin, temporarily creating the largest waterfall in Louisiana. The chaos didn't end until the pressure equalized about a week later. When things had finally calmed down, the lake had changed drastically. Its maximum depth was now about 200 feet, as opposed to its previous 10. Its shoreline had expanded, chimneys sticking straight out of the water where houses had once been. 9 out of the 11 barges claimed by the maelstrom floated back to the surface, although to remain somewhere in the ground below. The botanical gardens were gone, and many of the local trees. The salt mine was temporarily shut down, and although it did reopen, it was finally closed permanently in 1986. Texaco had to pay $32 million to the salt company, and a further $13 million to the gardens. Miraculously, the only casualties of the disaster were the trout. The most important difference, however, is that today Lake Pickner is now a saltwater lake with ocean species, 10 miles away from the ocean itself. All caused by some bad numbers and a 14-inch drill bit. I wish more people realized how truly post-apocalyptic life after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire was. In Britain, we had large cities made of masonry, aqueducts, running water, labourers and accountants, central heating, financial derivatives, or thriving civilization. After the collapse, we lost all of that. The plumbing and concrete broke down. Nobody knew how to fix it. People built mud huts inside old stadium and amphitheaters, using them as forts. That's some Diamond City stuff there. It took centuries for the economy to recover to the point that currency was needed again, rather than bartering. A side point, back in the day, York and Thebes were in the same country. That still blows my mind. Starfish Prime, that time when a space nuke could be seen from Hawaii and the resulting EMP knocked out street lights in Waikiki. Almost no one I know knows about this, and it wasn't in any school books we read. You'd think a space nuke, to see if we could blow up an asteroid belt, would make it into textbooks. Especially when tens of thousands of people witnessed a sun in the sky at night time. The May incident in World War II. American submarines were very good at getting away from Japanese surface ships. This was because the Japanese thought American submarines could only reach a much shallower depth than they actually could, and they never set their depth charges to these deeper depths. Congressman Andrew May decided it would be a good idea to hold a press conference announcing this fact. From then on, the Japanese set their depth charges to these deeper depths. Vice Admiral Charles L. Lockwood, commander of the US submarine fleet in the Pacific, estimated that May's security breach cost the United States Navy as many as 10 submarines and 800 crewmen killed in action. He said, "I hear Congressman May said the Jap depth charges are not set deep enough. He would be pleased to know that the Japs set them deeper now. Loose lips sink ships." When Ivan I of Russia married Zoe Sophia Paleologina, niece of Dragaces Paleologus or Constantine XI, her uncle gifted them a library along with many other treasures. This library somehow survived the burning of Moscow in 1493 and continued to be passed down to her son, Vasily II, and then on to her grandson, Ivan IV. During Ivan IV's reign of terror, the second half of his reign, he feared the library was too precious a treasure and worried it would be stolen. So he and a few men took the collection out of Moscow, what was most likely a 1-3-day horse ride, and buried the books, possibly in a vault. To ensure the location of the library would never get out, he had the men killed. Ivan IV died before the location of the library was ever revealed. We have no idea what could have been in this library or if the contents have even survived. Though some historians have speculated that Plato's Hermocrates, the final dialogue pertaining to Atlantis, could have been part of the collection, there's no proof that this is true. Voyagers who worked for fur trade companies lived gross lives. Since they spent most of their time in a canoe with limited supplies, they made do with what they had. Gross stuff below. They were often missing teeth, so when they drank tea they would shove a chunk of maple sugar in their teeth gaps and drink tea through it. When the tea was done they would remove the sugar chunk, wrap it up and save it for later. The number one cause of death for a voyageur was complications of hernia because they carried heavy cargo on their backs. The average sack was 90 pounds and they would make a contest out of who could carry the most. Often 3 and for the show-offs 4 packs. That's 360 pounds of cargo, so of course guts would herniate. They would tie their sashes as tight as possible around their stomach to keep all their internal organs in place. Since they tried to keep limited supplies so they could carry the most cargo, they would often use their toques as bowls. They would wax the yarn to waterproof the hats. So they would eat out of their hat that had hair, sweat, skin and probably bugs in it. They didn't pull over to the shore to go to the bathroom. When you had to go you would go over the side of the canoe. This applies for both number 1s and number 2s. So if you had to poop you were pooping in front of the rest of your crew. Their hygiene was awful. They often would not bathe or clean themselves up as it protected their skin from bugs and the sun. When they got close to a rendezvous point they would somewhat attempt to shave and clean themselves up. They made do with what they had, but learning about them has made me appreciate modern amenities like showers, toilets, access to health and dental care. Edit. Holy crap, I got gold. I know this is cliche but thank you. Here's some quick fun voyageur facts as a thank you. They paddled about 50 strokes per minute and the person who could carry a tune and played the fiddle were paid the best. They used music to keep pace and move faster. In Canada there were 2 main fur trade companies, Hudson Bay Company and Northwest Company. Those 2 companies hated each other and would get in fights all the time. Turf wars were a real thing. They were often under 5'7" because having tall people in the canoe made it difficult, and it was harder work for tall people because it took more effort to swing the paddle down. And lastly, this song was their jam. It's about when they die they want to be buried with all the wine in their head under a tap. Gross party animals to the end. Like and subscribe for more daily Reddit videos.